character. Everyone's like, what is going on with the refs? And I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, Sophie, you're like that? Yeah, Chloe, she's like that. She's like that. She ain't moving. Oh, and then she puts her hands on the hip. Let me talk to your manager. Oh.
The Indiana Fever's latest win should have been a night of celebration, but the spotlight quickly shifted from the court to chaos. As Sophie Cunningham cheered with her teammates, a WNBA cop suddenly shouted at her, demanding she stop and insisting she protect Caitlin Clark. The shocking confrontation left fans stunned and questioning why a player's joyful moment turned into a heated clash with security. So, was this about safety, favoritism, or something far deeper within the league's growing tensions? What really happened courtside that night? Celebration turned controversy. The Indiana Fever had just delivered one of their biggest playoff victories in years, and the atmosphere inside the arena was electric. Caitlin Clark, sidelined by injury, was absent from the floor, yet her team had managed to push forward, advancing against the odds. The celebration was pure, unfiltered joy. Players jumped, screamed, and hugged, while those on the bench cheered as loudly as the fans in the stands. Among them sat Sophie Cunningham, herself still recovering, leg braced but spirit unshaken, clapping with unrestrained pride for her teammates. Nothing about that moment seemed controversial. Sophie wasn't in uniform, wasn't running onto the court, and wasn't breaking any rules. She was simply standing near half court, lending her voice and presence to a night that belonged to the Fever. The focus should have been on Odyssey Sims, who had earlier taken a frightening fall and hit the floor hard, clutching her right shoulder as teammates rushed to her aid. Even then, Sophie, Caitlin Clark, and Chloe Bibby had only come as far as half court. They did not cross the line. They followed the rules. But that didn't stop chaos from erupting. Out of nowhere, a member of the WNBA's security detail stormed toward Sophie, shouting at her as though she were on the verge of triggering an incident. The scene was surreal. Sophie, visibly hindered by her leg brace, could barely move without assistance, let alone sprint onto the floor. And yet, the officer leaned in aggressively, barking as if she had been caught committing a crime. The look on Sophie's face told the story better than words ever could. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally that sharp Cunningham glare, the same look that has both defined her career and made her a target. In an instant, the joy of the Fever's triumph was overshadowed. The video spread like wildfire. Within minutes, social media was ablaze, not with highlights of the Fever's clutch performance, not with praise for Lexi Hull's decisive plays, but with outrage over the way Sophie Cunningham had been treated. Fans were furious. How could a player, injured and cheering from the sidelines, be singled out in such a hostile manner? Why was Sophie, of all people, once again at the center of a storm she didn't create? To many, the answer felt uncomfortably familiar. This wasn't the first time Sophie had been cast as the villain of the WNBA. Her unapologetic personality, her refusal to stay quiet, and her willingness to challenge the league's preferred narratives had made her a polarizing figure. She was bold, outspoken, and unwilling to soften her edges for the sake of approval. For some fans, that made her magnetic. For others, particularly those who saw her confidence as arrogance, it made her a target. And yet, this moment crossed into something more troubling. This wasn't rival fans booing from the stands or critical headlines in the press. This was the league's own staff treating Sophie like a problem when all she was doing was celebrating her team's success. The double standard could not have been clearer, and once again, Sophie Cunningham stood in the eye of the storm. And what does it reveal when the league itself silences celebration? Was Sophie's joy punished, or something far more unsettling? Keep watching. A celebration hijacked. The Indiana Fever's victory should have been remembered as a landmark moment, a playoff win that carried them into the semifinals, achieved even without Caitlin Clark on the court. The crowd was alive with pride, the players were buzzing with adrenaline, and the bench was bursting with energy. Caitlin Clark, Chloe Bibby, and Sophie Cunningham all rose to their feet near midcourt, clapping and cheering just like any team does in moments of high emotion. They didn't cross the line onto the floor, they didn't interfere with play, and they didn't break a single rule. Yet when a league security officer stormed over to confront someone, it wasn't Clark. It wasn't Bibby. It was Sophie. Only Sophie. The decision to single her out sparked instant outrage. Fans inside the arena saw it unfold with disbelief, and the reaction online was even louder. Twitter threads and YouTube comment sections overflowed with frustration, many bluntly calling out what they saw as an obvious double standard. Why was Sophie treated like a troublemaker while the others were ignored for doing the exact same thing? Some voices accused the league of bias, pointing to how Sophie, a white blonde player who has never fit the WNBA's carefully curated storylines, has repeatedly been framed in ways her peers are not. Others went further, highlighting the hypocrisy. If a moment like this involved Angel Reese or Natasha Cloud, it would likely be celebrated as passion and leadership. But when Sophie showed support, she was painted as entitled, disruptive, and out of control. The irony was painful. Sophie didn't lose her temper. She didn't lash out. Instead, she stood firm, making it clear she would not be intimidated, even as confusion and disbelief crossed her face. The confrontation itself created more chaos than anything Sophie had done. The officer wasn't maintaining order, she was manufacturing a scene, and the public saw it immediately. The backlash was swift, sharp, and widespread. But as the noise grew, it became obvious this was about more than just one playoff celebration. It was about how the WNBA continues to treat players who don't fit into its preferred mold. Caitlin Clark has already lived this reality for 2 seasons, targeted on the court with hard fouls that too often go uncalled, while narratives in the media attempt to downplay her influence and diminish her popularity. Sophie Cunningham, who has always been polarizing for her boldness and refusal to conform, finds herself tangled in the same web. The frustration for fans is simple. Instead of embracing players who move the needle, the league seems intent on pushing them back. Sophie is one of the WNBA's most talked about figures. Her highlights trend, her interviews generate clicks, and even when sidelined by injury, she commands attention. That kind of visibility is priceless for a league still striving for growth. Yet, instead of capitalizing on her influence, the WNBA allowed her to be publicly embarrassed by a security officer during a moment that should have been nothing but celebration. So what does it say about the WNBA when sidelined stars like Sophie draw crowds, yet face humiliation instead of celebration? Stay glued. When celebration becomes scandal. The outrage didn't simmer, it exploded. Within minutes of the clip surfacing online, hashtags like Free Sophie and WNBA Exposed were flooding timelines. What should have been a celebration of the Fever's playoff advancement turned into a digital firestorm, with fans across Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok demanding answers. Their anger wasn't vague or unfocused, it was sharp, pointed, and unrelenting. Comment after comment slammed the league for what they saw as selective enforcement, a pattern where certain players are disciplined or scrutinized more harshly than others. Sophie Cunningham had simply cheered from the sidelines, yet she was treated as though she had committed a violation. Fans weren't buying the excuse of maintaining order. Instead, they argued this was about silencing players who don't fall in line with the league's preferred image. The frustration wasn't happening in isolation either. Supporters quickly began drawing connections to past controversies. Many compared the incident to the backlash Angel Reese once faced when fans booed her and were immediately accused of racism, while others noted how Caitlin Clark's repeated hard fouls had been dismissed as just part of the game. To those watching closely, the Sophie Cunningham confrontation wasn't just a one-off. It was another entry in a long line of double standards. The language from the crowd online was scathing. The security officer was mocked relentlessly, labeled everything from a power-hungry mall cop to the WNBA's latest clown show. It might have sounded harsh, but the venom carried a clear message. Fans were exhausted. They wanted to talk basketball, not off-court theatrics. They wanted to celebrate the Fever's resilience, not debate why an injured player was being treated like a threat for clapping her hands. And that's the heart of the issue. The WNBA has been vocal about its goals: growth, higher ratings, more recognition, the respect it deserves as a professional league. But moments like this unravel that progress in seconds. Every time the spotlight shines, instead of highlighting athletic excellence, the story drifts into controversy, often sparked not by the players themselves, but by the league's own handling of situations. This time, instead of celebrating a playoff win that could have brought in new fans, the narrative became, why was Sophie Cunningham shouted at during a moment of joy? Fans see it for what it is: self-sabotage. No amount of carefully worded press releases or polished interviews can mask what people saw with their own eyes. And those eyes watched a player in a leg brace, doing nothing more than supporting her teammates, being singled out and embarrassed on national television. The deeper problem goes beyond Sophie. It cuts into the credibility of the league itself. Fans don't want to see their favorite athletes treated like criminals for cheering. They don't want endless double standards. And most of all, they don't want to be told that everything is fine when the evidence screams otherwise. What makes this episode even more damning is the context. This wasn't a heated brawl, an ugly altercation, or chaos spiraling out of control. This was joy. Pure, unfiltered, playoff joy. If the WNBA cannot allow its players to embrace that without turning it into controversy, how can it possibly convince casual fans, those it desperately needs, to care about the product at all? So how did pure playoff joy turn into controversy? And what does it reveal about the WNBA's fragile image? Stay tuned. The Sophie Cunningham Dilemma. The uproar didn't fade. If anything, it intensified once fans began comparing angles and replaying clips from that exact moment on the Fever bench. In one frame, you see Sophie Cunningham standing near midcourt, clapping and smiling, her bulky leg brace making any movement beyond that spot impossible. Right beside her, Caitlin Clark and Chloe Bibby are doing the same, cheering, celebrating, soaking in the energy of a playoff win that meant everything to the team. Yet no one stormed toward Clark. No officer barked at Bibby. The confrontation was aimed solely at Sophie, and the more people watched it back, the more it became impossible to call it a coincidence. This wasn't about enforcing a rule. Fans recognized it immediately. It was about sending a message, and the league's choice of target was telling. Sophie Cunningham is not just another bench player. She is outspoken. She is fiery. And perhaps most importantly, she refuses to conform. Over the years, she has built a reputation for being blunt, fearless, and unwilling to bend to authority. For some, that makes her magnetic. For others, especially in a league that struggles with criticism of its internal decisions, it makes her a problem. Unlike Paige Buchers, often framed as the polished face of women's basketball, or Angel Reese, widely embraced by league marketing campaigns, Sophie doesn't fit the mold. She doesn't soften her edges for cameras, doesn't play politics with her words, and doesn't shy away from confrontations on or off the court. That combination has made her polarizing, but it has also made her popular, wildly popular. Her highlights trend, her name sparks debate, and even in street clothes, she commands attention. In a league hungry for star power, she brings eyes. And yet, the WNBA has rarely embraced that draw. Look at the official marketing materials. Sophie Cunningham is often nowhere to be found. Players with half her relevance appear in glossy promos and sponsored ads, while Sophie is left out. The pattern stretches further. When she clashes with rivals, the narrative paints her as the villain, entitled, reckless, even toxic. But when others show the same intensity, the label becomes passion, leadership, and competitive fire. That double standard hasn't gone unnoticed, and fans are tired of pretending not to see it. The cop incident only magnified what many already believed. Here was Sophie, sidelined with an injury, physically limited, unable to run more than a few feet. Yet she was the one treated like a threat. The footage told the story. A celebration turned into a public reprimand, with Sophie singled out while her teammates went unbothered. Social media erupted not just with anger, but with disbelief. Why Sophie? Why now? Why escalate against a player who could barely move? The explanations didn't add up. Unless, of course, you consider the possibility that this was never about security or rules at all. It was about Sophie Cunningham, about control, about reminding one of the league's most unapologetic players that, in the WNBA's hierarchy, her presence is tolerated but never fully welcomed. But what if Sophie's reprimand wasn't about safety at all, but silencing her voice? How deep does this agenda run? A league under the microscope. The question now is bigger than Sophie Cunningham. What does this mean for the league itself? Because moments like these don't just bruise a single player's image. They strike at the heart of how the WNBA is seen. Fans, especially the new wave of casual viewers drawn in by Caitlin Clark's meteoric rise, are watching every move. Many of them came in skeptical, curious to see if women's basketball could match the excitement and energy they were promised. And what did they witness? A player in a leg brace being shouted down for celebrating her team's playoff victory. To these fans, it didn't look like professionalism. It didn't look like growth. It looked petty, small, and avoidable. Instead of basking in the glow of an uplifting fever win, the storyline turned into a sideshow. Security officers berating a player whose only crime was cheering. That perception matters, because in sports, optics can outweigh statistics. You can talk all you want about climbing TV ratings or brag about trending hashtags, but if the takeaway for viewers is that the league creates drama out of joy, then none of that growth sticks. And fans weren't silent about it. They hammered the league online, and they hammered hard. Thousands of comments poured in, many of them brutal. Hashtags like Free Sophie and WNBA Exposed surged, painting a picture of frustration that couldn't be ignored. Some critics zeroed in on Commissioner Kathy Engelbert directly, accusing her of allowing these embarrassments to pile up under her leadership. A few went further still, calling the WNBA under her watch the most embarrassing league in sports. Others demanded her resignation, convinced that repeated mishandlings, from officiating controversies to lopsided disciplinary responses, have turned the product into more circus than sport. That's the danger. When people are talking more about off-court controversies than on-court brilliance, that isn't success, it's failure. And the tragedy is that it overshadows the incredible talent the league actually has. Players like Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Angel Reese, and countless others are capable of drawing massive attention with their skills alone. Yet far too often, it's the manufactured drama or poor handling of incidents that dominates the conversation. Through it all, Sophie herself didn't flinch. She didn't explode online or turn the moment into a shouting match. Instead, she let her body language speak. Standing firm, eyes steady, she sent a message that was impossible to miss. Intimidation would not break her. That silent defiance resonated. Fans flooded her social media with messages of support, rallying behind her stronger than ever. The irony is unmistakable. The more she's singled out, the more powerful her fan base becomes. Every attempt to diminish her only deepens the loyalty of those who stand with her. If the league were smart, they'd take note. Sophie Cunningham isn't going anywhere. Her popularity is only growing, her impact undeniable. But history shows that the WNBA hasn't built much of a reputation for handling its stars wisely. And with every misstep, they risk alienating not just die-hard fans, but the very newcomers they claim to want. Now, what happens when a league that craves growth keeps alienating its own stars? Can it survive the backlash ahead? Stay with us. The pattern fans refuse to ignore. To understand why this confrontation struck such a nerve, you only have to look back at the league's recent history. The treatment of Caitlin Clark is the clearest example. For 2 seasons, she has been hammered on the court, targeted with fouls harsher than anyone else, yet the referees rarely step in with the same urgency they would for others. Fans notice. They ask, how can the league's brightest star, the player who draws millions of new eyes, be left unprotected? Then came Lexi Hull. In the playoffs, she rose when her team needed her most, delivering the kind of performance that deserved headlines. Yet league media barely whispered her name. Instead of celebrating her grit, they moved on as though her effort didn't exist. And now, Sophie Cunningham, shouted at for doing nothing more than cheering in support of her teammates. One incident alone might be brushed aside, but together these moments form a pattern that is impossible to ignore. The WNBA likes to promote the narrative that growth comes from the collective, that the success of the league is shared evenly across every player. But the reality is starkly different. Growth is being fueled by a handful of names that move the needle: Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Paige Buchers, and yes, Sophie Cunningham. The rest of the league benefits from the spotlight these women bring, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. Yet instead of elevating them all, the league seems to pick favorites, supporting some while sidelining others. It's a short-sighted game. Fans aren't naive. They see the double standards, the selective promotion, the hypocrisy in who gets celebrated and who gets punished. And they know where this road leads. A fan base that feels manipulated will eventually tune out. No television deal, no corporate sponsorship, no surge of hashtags will save a league that treats its own stars like enemies. The Fever's playoff run should have been a perfect moment of celebration, a chance to showcase Lexi Hull's heroics, Aaliyah Boston's dominance, and the resilience of a team fighting without Caitlin Clark. Instead, the lasting image is of a security guard barking at Sophie Cunningham like she were a threat. That single moment erased the joy of victory and replaced it with outrage. Fans flooded timelines with anger, and every post, every meme, every reply only magnified the frustration. At the heart of it, Sophie's crime was caring about her team, and for that, the league embarrassed itself once again. So, what do you think? Is the WNBA sabotaging its own stars through petty favoritism, or are fans overreacting to isolated moments? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.